Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us in today's webinar, which is Getting Ahead of the Crisis Curve. I'm Robin Harrison, Marketing Director at Gobeyond Partners. So first of all, I'd just like to remind you this session is being recorded. We will be distributing a recording afterwards to all those who've attended and those who've registered. So please, feel free to share that onwards with your colleagues if you'd like. I'd like to introduce our panelists this morning. So we've got Mark Palmer. Mark's CEO of Gobeyond Partners. He's got 30 years experience across operations, and today Mark leads Gobeyond Partners, helping clients to solve their most complex operational challenges around customer experience, cost reduction and sustainable growth across the world. Very lucky to have Helen Murray with us as a special guest. Helen is Chief Customer Solutions Officer at Webhelp UK. So for those of you who don't already know, Webhelp is a leading provider of outsourced customer engagement services, helping brands to build better customer experiences. And in Helen's role, she uses her experience, which is considerable across both insourced operations and outsourced operations, to help clients listen to their customers and deliver the right solution for them across all channels. So what are we going to be talking about today? There are several agenda items. We're going to talk about the collective journey that we've all been on together and how we see those phases. We're going to delve into what made some businesses more resilient than others, and while others struggled. And we're going to talk a little bit about the new normal, a phrase that everyone's talking about. So how different is it going to be and what changes are emerging? And then how we can prepare for uncertain futures. Where should our focus lie as we go through the coming months? Finally, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. If you don't get a chance to ask your question or to have it answered, we can of course pick up afterwards. So but do ask questions as we go, and I'll tell you how to do that in one moment. So how do you submit a question? Well, if you're on the mobile, you just tap the questions icon and you can add that in at the bottom portion of the screen. And if you're on your laptop, and I expect most of us at this moment in time are on our laptops, just open the question pane on the bottom right hand side of the GoToWebinar panel, and you can ask your question. And it's not a hugely long session, so we will try and answer as many as possible, but we're not going to be able to go through all the questions, I'm sure. So a bit of context to today's session. I'm quickly going to remind people about the crisis curve and the phases that we at Gobeyond Partners have identified across organisations as a whole during COVID-19, and what we think the impact is and how we might all respond. I'm not going to dwell on the first two. Clearly, business as usual, which now seems like a very long time ago, and the crisis itself emerging. But I'm going to talk about the other phases briefly as some context to Mark and Helen and our conversation. So first of all is rapid crisis response. So this is immediately after the WHO and government intervention. So I think we all recognise that our priorities there were, first of all, the safety of our people in every organisation, and second of all, keeping the lights on. So how do we run our business at a time where there's a significant amount of change to working practices, and we've still got customers to serve and employees to pay. The second phase, which is taking back control, this is all about how organisations realise that they've got through the initial few days, they've managed to get people working from home, and started to think about how they can optimise that, and how people start bedding into those everyday routines and rhythms, although they might be different. Business as unusual is a phase that we're probably seeing predominantly in the UK and across Europe at the moment, which is where governments are starting to recognise that this is going to be something prevalent over the medium term. So there's going to be some kind of measures, be them lockdown, social distancing, whatever it might be, but changes to working practices and changes to forcing consumer behaviour over the coming weeks and months. So this is where we see organisations thinking about how they make medium-term investments, how they start to really optimise what they're doing, restart transformation to try and make sure that they fare well as they come out of this crisis. And that brings us on to transition to the new normal. I don't think any of us can say exactly when the new normal is going to be or exactly what it's going to be, but it's really important that we think about what are those elements we can take from business as usual, and what are those elements we can take from business as unusual, so those things that actually we think are better than they used to be, or even more relevant for the future, and combine them for competitive advantage. Because what I think we all realise is there's a new unique opportunity, although it has been forced upon us, to change the shape of our businesses where we need to, and those businesses that think about doing that in the most considered way are those that will maximise the opportunities coming out of this crisis when we eventually do that. So clearly the shape of this curve is going to depend on your own specific circumstances, so your sector, your geographies, your operating model, but the broad phases as we see them across our client base remain broadly the same. And as I mentioned before, at least across the UK and Europe, we are seeing most organisations in a business as unusual phase, but clearly we all need to be thinking about the future and not just in the moment during this current crisis. So I'm going to switch the slides off now, and hopefully you'll be able to see all of us presenters and no slides. So Mark and Helen, welcome and good morning. I think it's fair to say that no sector's been untouched by the crisis, but from what you've both seen, what are the characteristics that have made some businesses more resilient to the initial shockwave? So Mark, let's start with you. I'm not sure if you could, no, can't hear you there, Mark. Perhaps Helen, let's start with you while Mark tries his audio.
Okay, good morning everyone. So a couple of things that I've particularly seen in terms of characteristics. The first one is organisations that were looking externally and really considering, particularly globally, what was happening and the impact, and where they were in a much better position to be proactive. So making preemptive strikes on how they managed through this was really important. So those that were able to be proactive and creative in terms of moving employees to work from home were creative around and proactive around comms for customers, and even considering policies and processes and what that meant. So for example, a lot of people had to start thinking about refunds and how they went through that process and how they communicated that. So the ability to be proactive, I think was really important. The second one that I've observed is really organisations that were genuinely and could continue to be people focused. So putting your employees at the heart of everything you did had a huge impact in terms of being able to get those employees to be ambassadors, being able to get them to be in a position where they would go the extra mile and completely supporting the brand. And I think they are the two biggest things that I've seen.
Thanks, Helen. Mark's just logging back on again, so hopefully he'll be able to have some sound. I'm interested, Helen, in do you have any good examples of where you saw brands, obviously excluding their names, but some things people might be able to take away in terms of how they've responded and how they've really supported their employees and helped them to be brand ambassadors during this?
Yeah, so there's some great examples in the retail sector, particularly in, as we all know, in groceries, where they put a lot of effort into making sure that the employees were in a position where they understood the impact that it's going to have on the customer base. So I think making sure that it isn't just a customer lens, it is a people lens, has enabled a lot of those retailers to really look after customers and to think about what customers need when they're feeling vulnerable or in a time of complete change. So the acknowledgement with some of these brands around what that meant for an individual working from home. And a lot of people had never worked from home. So getting them to that point where they were comfortable that it was an environment that they could still do their job was really important.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I'm just going to mark you there, or have you got stuck off? Give him a few seconds just to try and get in. Hopefully be able to dial in. Hi, Mark. We can see your lips moving, but we can't hear the insight. Might be better to dial in using your phone. They're very strange. I'm guessing it's your computer microphone. Okay, we'll wait for Mark to dial in, but I think let's move on to slightly, Helen. So if we just think about the new normal, it's become a bit of a modern cliche, and I know that I've got certain views on this, and I'm aware that probably a lot of people on this call do as well, and I know Mark will be eager to share his. But how different do you really think that's going to be in your world? Oh, we've lost you, Helen.
Can you hear me now?
That's perfect, yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, I think it's going to be quite different. I think we've all seen customers' behaviours have changed. Our own behaviours have changed quite dramatically, and I think there will be a lot of that is permanent. I do think that, you know, if we look at what's happening on the high street and how our behaviours change, and we've all become more digital, online savvy, I think that will bleed into all of our lives and what we do in business as well. So my view is that businesses will quickly mature from a digital perspective, and they will continue on that journey at pace. But they do need to ensure that they are being more human. So the term of taking the robot out of the human, we do need to make sure that we keep that balance in terms of the human contact. And I think we will find that operationally that will benefit on both sides. So I think that's probably the first thing from a digital perspective. The second thing for me is that I think we will see that the new model will be a blend of work from home and on premise. So I think we will have a hybrid model. I don't think we'll ever go back to completely working inside 100%. And I think it gives us the opportunity in business to think about how we design that new hybrid model. So particularly looking at a combination of what role types and looking at individual preferences. So there are people that are much more comfortable being able to work from home, much more comfortable in terms of the time they spend working, but there are others that actually do need to be on premise. So I think there will be a lot around individual preferences, but I also think we have to take into account commercially what that means and location. So where our sites are and in what regions and how that comes into it. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of that new hybrid model work from home, but I think we will see a lot of advantages from that. But then the final bit, I think, for me is how we will need to rethink how we manage and engage with our people. There's significant amount of work to do to redress what we need to do when we have got a hybrid model. There will be a lot of thinking around policies and processes, but fundamentally, I think it will come down to how we communicate and getting the right balance between video, audio, working from home will be really important. but also how we engage with our people, how we trust our people, and how we make them still feel like they're part of the brand. I think, you know, if you look at what we do when we work with different brands, different clients, we spend a lot of time making sure that we can bring the brand alive, and not having that in a home working situation is something that we need to consider. How do culturally we keep people aligned? How do we get them aligned behind brands, and motivated and engaged? So I think there's a lot to think about, but it's an opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Well, I think one of the things that we've been talking about a lot as an executive team, and I think, you know, my views probably mirror Mark's on this. So just to share some thoughts, I think we can learn a lot from what we've seen in the phases that have happened so far as we go into the new normal. So the businesses we've seen succeed, and we think they've succeeded really well, are those that are defined as key works or essential services, but critically not just that, it's those that have had a really compelling digital offer. So going back to your point before, those businesses who have a more digital operating model for service have been able to deliver or achieve better things through this crisis. And also, I think businesses with a multi-sector approach. So I guess taking those things and taking, you know, the lessons that we can see from those organisations, I've probably underlined 3 points there. It's that if you are diversified in terms of sector, if you do have a digital or a more digital operating model, and if you have got some really strong core capabilities and have been agile enough to start to repurpose them and rethink them, for me, they're the key things that organizations need to think about as they transition to whatever a new normal might look like. So and thinking about those lessons, I know a lot of businesses we work with certainly have a long list of change related to some or all of those, and in some cases about 20 more things. And one thing we need to realize is that it's going to be far more focus on cost. You know, we are going to enter a recession, and there needs to, on a global level, and we need to think about how we can be very focused on our priorities for transformation. So I think we're not talking about a top 10 list of change anymore. We're probably talking about a top 2 or 3, and proportionately, those top 3, or in real terms, those top 3 are probably going to get more investment. So whilst you're probably not spending as much on change overall, there won't be the long tail. But certainly all of those businesses that so far have either paid lip service to digital transformation or haven't done as much as they should have, I think that needs to be a real focus, thinking about the success in the future.
Mark here.
Oh, hi, Mark. I was just talking about some of our views from a Gobeyond Partners perspective. So I think we've covered off, you know, razor focus on priorities, but I know you've got some strong views on that and being outcome focused, if you'd like to share them.
Yes, first of all, apologies to everybody. The internet is a wonderful thing at the most important moment. So thank you, Robin. Yeah, so the point that I wanted to make is that as we see budgets perhaps might have been set at, let's say, 100, and clearly budgets aren't where they used to be because resources are thinly spread and clearly revenues are down. But my own feeling is that the top 3, and it may not be the top 3 you initially thought were the top 3, are where everybody should focus their efforts. And it may well be that you end up spending more time and more resources on those top 3, and you let the other 7 go to one side, and clearly getting those 3 right is important, but I think there are prioritization above prioritization. I think another issue to answer the question around you know, how things will be in the future is I think there'll be a change also in attitudes to work. So what do I mean by that? I'm always anxious to tell people who work for me, you know, don't feel that you need to be in the office at 7:30 and leave at 9 o'clock in the evening. That's never going to impress me. What's always, you know, is impressive are people who get things done. And if getting things done in your own or with your own organisation and taking into account life's constraints works for you, then that's what you've got to focus on. So there's a lot of, I think, in the past activity rather than value. So I think today there's an opportunity that your commute is perhaps less frequent or not happening at all. And I think that time should be turned into planning and thinking time, the two activities that, as leaders, we crave and never really get enough time to do. But I also think that people will now start to judge people much more on what they do, not their hours at work, and clearly there'll be a much more balanced attitude towards how you organise your day.
Thanks,
so,
Mark.
Back to you, Robin.
And while we've got you, I might ask another question in case we end up losing you again. But I guess this could be the new normal, of course, is more tech failures, but let's hope not. So thinking about so Mark and Helen have both outlined there some food for thought for all of us. I think we need to recognise that no one has all the answers, and the future is by its very nature uncertain, particularly at the moment. How do you think we can start preparing for those uncertain futures, Mark? What steps should businesses be taking to be more resilient, do you think?
Well, I'm sure just partly referred to this earlier, Robin. I'm sure you ably talked about my own thoughts on the characteristics of businesses that have been successful. Is a lot of them have been able, with flat structures, have been able to adapt quickly, and I think that's linked to this next point. Is that your proposition that you had in the market may not be fit for today. I think the danger is that people want to go down a very innovative route and reimagine who they are and what they do. And I think mature capabilities are the starting point. So I was talking to friends about Rolls-Royce over the weekend, and there's no doubt they weren't necessarily just in the business of aviation. They're in the business of providing power. So they may well be thinking, and I know they're thinking, as they move their headquarters to Germany, how can they use the skills that they've got in different markets? And I think there is a temptation to completely abandon what you know and what you can do, whereas I think the mature capabilities are the bedrock upon which you can change, and so your new proposition needs to be based on that. I think as well, there's the digital piece is important here, and I'm attracted to reminded of a visit I went on a number of months ago where I could see an army of people in a Birmingham site who were essentially answering queries that were coming down the social media channel. As everybody's aware, there are many ways in which a business can be approached. It's not just the CEO email anymore. And businesses are rightly concerned about how they respond to those the queries that come down the social media channel. So this business, I think, very much saw that as noise and as cost, and had shipped the work out from London to Birmingham, thereby reduced their costs by 30%. But there were literally armies of people responding to them, and my thought to the business was to say, well, look, there is a vital few in here, but 90% of this can be done through automation using a chatbot, and we can teach a chatbot to give some great answers for 90% of it, and there's perhaps 5 to 10% of it, which is the CEO should see, and maybe even might make us change course as a business with some of our policies and processes. But my concern was that there was a loss, I guess, of what was important and the vital few. So I think that automation and digital is going to play a role, but it needs to be done intelligently. And I can give my final answer to your question, Robin, goes without saying, is that business continuity planning was possibly an agenda item one level above the AOB, whereas clearly in the future it's going to be up there alongside revenue and reputational risk. So thanks for the question. Those are the 3 level of answers.
Thanks, Mark. That's great. Helen?
So I just to reinforce the point. I think we do need to think about digital transformation and how we accelerate that. We have all seen that online sales channels have been critical to the survival, but I think going forward, the focus has to be on identifying what the right sales, marketing, contact channels are for your customer base and for your business, and they need to be strengthened. So continuously focusing on how your business operates from a digital perspective is critical. I think the other side of that is, as I said before, the employee element. I do think insight is going to play a much bigger role going forward. So knowing your customer and understanding your customer and how they behave is really important, and will continue to be important in informing what you do as a business. But knowing your employees and understanding your employees will be just as important, and enabling them to have the trust, the level of empowerment to do the right thing for customers will be critical going forward. So I genuinely believe that getting that balance from an insight perspective and being able to act on it both for customers and for employees will be really important.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. That's great. Well, they're the main sort of themes that we wanted to cover off. I've seen there's lots of questions coming through. I guess from my perspective, just listening to what you both said, there's a few key points there around being adaptable, being very focused and prioritizing what you're going to work on, but also you both tempered the idea of digital with the idea of human, and I think that's something we need to be all the more cautious and considered with going forward. So I've got a few questions I've just seen coming up. The first one I'm going to ask you is do either of you or both of you have any insights on the impact on staff or people productivity operating in the new normal? Have you seen anything from your own organisations or from client businesses that might point to that one way or the other? Helen, do you want to answer that first? I can see you nodding.
Yeah, so absolutely. We have seen that initially as people got into how they operated, how they collaborated, how they communicated, there was a drop in performance and efficiency. But what we've very quickly seen is that once we got over that, then people are much more effective. So, you know, in the contact center world, we talk about shrinkage, and that percentage has, on some campaigns, has more than halved, because you know, people have got that level of flexibility, and it's interesting that they seem to have a better attention span when they are working. So I think, you know, there are some cases, obviously, where the environment that we're in right now, people are trying to juggle home life, they're trying to juggle homeschooling, so there are some people that have found it difficult, but in the main, we've been able to be supportive around different hours, different shift patterns, and being very effective in terms of that mode of working.
Yeah, Mark, anything to add to Helen's points there?
Well, I mean, I've seen a very, very similar view. I think the only area where I would say we have struggled is some of the collaborative working that we would normally see, you know, the workshop environment. Whilst we've used a piece of software called Mural, which has been hugely effective and clients very happy with it, there is no doubt that people come out of those all-day sessions using software and they are absolutely shattered, and they confess that they would almost certainly have been less tired had they been in a face-to-face environment. So I think in most scenarios, absolutely the same, but I think that collaborative workspace environment, it is so full on in a digital world that there isn't the sort of social break that you would normally get but I think we need to work harder at building that in.
Thanks, Mark. I have seen an interesting, just to the side, few pieces of research lately talking about the idea of video conference fatigue, and just because you can video conference doesn't mean you necessarily should, in the same way that meetings and or phone calls work in combination or separately. So something for everyone to think about. So I've got a question that's come through about managers and leaders. So as the nature and arena of work starts to change, how do you both think the roles of managers and leaders at all levels need to adapt? Helen, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is in terms of communication. I think we have started to see that we really need to work hard on how we communicate. Things even down to tone of voice and being able to pick up on signals that you can't, if you're in an environment where you can see body language and you can understand how people are feeling, it's very different. So for me, probably the biggest piece is communication. But it's also collaboration. So as we said, being able to work together. And I do think that getting leaders to understand that there is new ways of doing it and how we sustain the ability to work together and to be part of a team and to be part of the shape of the culture, I think is really, really important. But it also comes to trust. So I think we have, through the COVID-19 experience, we have learned that we can entrust our employees and we should trust them. But there's also the reverse element where employees need to know how to trust the businesses and the organizations that they work in. So helping employees from a trust perspective, I think, will be really, really important. And then finally, it's the bit around, as we talk to, the blended models that we'll have going forward and work from home and different shift patterns. It's getting those work patterns effective from a leadership perspective will be really important.
Thanks, Helen. Mark, any thoughts on that? I should add that you've had quite a few questions by email beforehand and a few different, obviously everyone submitted their themes as well. So I'm trying to be fair and pick some questions coming through and also some that were asked beforehand as well. Mark, any thoughts on that?
So two rapid ones. So completely agree with what Helen was saying. See a change in the team leader and operations management roles and going all the way up through the business to a world where I think we're tempted very often to come up with the answer for our people. And we've always encouraged people to move to the planning and cross-department collaboration ethic. And I can see now that people are moving to that because they see the planning and execution is something which has a daily, an hourly, a weekly, a monthly, and a yearly play. So I can see those things coming through much stronger. I think the other point as well, and it comes back to a point I made earlier about being overloaded with initiatives and projects. There's no doubt that I'm sure a lot of people had a wonderful moment when this happened, where they were able to forget a whole load of meetings and a whole load of initiatives and actions that they had that probably they weren't that interested in and didn't think that was that important. And there's been a wonderful opportunity now to build back up from zero and to concentrate on what adds value and just do that rather than perhaps just scratch meaninglessly away at small percentages of waste. So I think the back to the let's concentrate on what adds value and stick to that knitting is something that I can see people need to hang on to.
Thanks, Mark. I had a lovely message from someone saying, well done in the way you all managed your think boxes through Mark's IT glitch. So thank you for being so gracious, and thank you for blaming that on Mark as well. That's excellent.
I'm happy to take responsibility. Yeah, thank you.
There's a question that's come through about PCI compliance. I'd probably like to broaden that out to just compliance more generally, because I think that's important. It's not just PCI that's impacted by this, but what are the implications for compliance in a home working scenario, and how can we all start to think differently about that or manage that? So Helen, over to you for any thoughts, and then Mark, just go straight over to you on that one, just conscious of time.
Okay. So I think in a nutshell, for me, technology has to play a big part in all of this. So making sure that we look at certain apps and systems that are very locked down. I think that's the most important piece, that we take it away from individuals and personalities as much as possible. So I think that's the safest way. But there will always be an element, whether it is on premise or working from home, that cannot be completely locked down. So it's the ability to understand and how you manage that. So testing, checking, what you've got in place, I think becomes increasingly important to identify if there's an issue and then resolve it. But yeah, technology is a big part of it, and then actually how we spot if there's gaps in the processes.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, so I think I'm attracted to this pursuit of perfection concept here. Helen's absolutely right. You can't get rid of all of the risk now. Technology is going to reduce it over time. There's no doubt that there is going to have to be investment in technology to reduce the risk, and I've been signing off those checks myself recently, because we see the cost of getting it wrong is enormous, both at a reputation and at a financial side. So I think it's incumbent on organisations more than ever not to rely on process and to really move to a zero error target, knowing you never get there. But I think that imagining how the scenarios where compliance is at risk, and applying technology, not for technology's sake, but to attack those scenarios, will be the key.
Yeah, thank you. So the pursuit of perfection, I like that as a soundbite. One of the themes that has come through strongly in the operational challenges beforehand was the idea of cost. So I think this is not a COVID-19 issue. This is a perennial issue. But where you've got high pressure from and increasing workload for operational cost reduction, how can we keep operations running smoothly and customer satisfied? So I guess those thoughts are in the context of COVID-19, but I think are applicable for most of our businesses. So Helen, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we have to be realistic about the number of channels that are available, and I've seen some businesses really think hard about what channels they want to operate in. So prioritizing channels, but taking into account that potential for forcing demand into different channels, and how you manage that. So I think that's the first thing I've seen. The second one is really acting on demand insight. So stepping up a gear in terms of understanding what the demand type is, and what the drivers are, and then taking rapid decisions on how you handle that. So, obvious things like IVR, website changes to the website, proactive comms to customers, really thinking about the approach, and then finally automation. It's a big one for all of us. I think some businesses are better placed to benefit from automation, but I think it has to be one of the critical pillars that all organisations look to.
Thanks, Helen. Mark, any views? I'm sure you have.
Well, I just come back to what I said before, that this is again a priority play. A business can stand itself up in a high pressure environment, but But what you have to do is to go back to the client, because the client may be asking you for 15 different things, or it could be a customer, and it's incumbent on leaders to say to themselves, right, if we can't meet all of the pressures now, what are the 5 or 6 things that we've got to do? And I think that is, all of my experiences have been the clients do understand the situation, and it's a piece of work that you need to do together to say, right, what absolutely matters, and to concentrate on those things. So there will be clearly services that you might offer that you decide in the short term you can't, and that's perfectly reasonable as long as you're open and honest and proactive about it.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to ask just one final question before we wrap up. So someone's asked about how do we replicate the informal discussions that happen in the workplace at the water cooler or a cup of coffee or a discussion at someone's desk. I think we've all found that a bit of a challenge lately. So Helen, any personal tips on how you've had more informal conversations and might continue to do so?
It is a challenge. It is a difficult one. What I find is that I personally will just, have conversations with people, phone conversations typically, that are not related to, an objective from a work perspective. So just checking in on colleagues, checking in on your team to really understand how they are. And just have random conversations, and it can help.
Thank you. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, so I've been doing 3 things consciously, may or may not be useful. So one is every meeting that we have, make sure we're not straight into the agenda. I know that sounds slightly unprofessional, but I think it's important to have 5 or 6 minutes where you're perhaps, exchanging on what you did over the weekend or talking about something in the news. So perhaps not being as professional as in the past, just to have some more humanity in the meetings. I've got a few WhatsApp groups set up with communities so that you can share nonsense, but also share insight things that you might have talked about at the water cooler, which are loosely related, but just good for general context. And then the third thing I've been doing, which again you might not want to do, it's been in the evenings, is to sort of set up some pizza evenings with different parts of the business and to have conversations about the future, about how they're finding things, just in small groups. So again, it's not full on, but they're just finding some focused time, which actually is very relaxing, but seeing people in a more social setting and talking about the posters on the back of their office wall, but having time which is outside of the working day. Not everybody wants to perhaps give up that time in the evening, but I've found it useful. So those are the 3 things that I've been doing with my teams.
Thanks, Mark. And I think one thing this crisis has done definitely is brought the kind of humanity to both relationships in an organisation and outside. I know a lot of our team are having more informal conversations with clients that are less around work, which I think is a great thing for building that rapport. So we haven't got to everyone's questions. I'm happy to pick up anything outside of this. If you've got any burning issues or questions, I know Mark and Helen will be delighted to answer them by email or have a one-to-one chat. So, do send anything through or any additional thoughts. We'd love to help you build our perspective even more for the future. There will be a follow-up email that has the recording in and we won't edit out the technical difficulties, don't worry, so you can replay them to your heart's content. But thank you all for attending. Thank you all for being great humoured. A big thank you to Mark and Helen. And we will be sharing more thoughts on the different themes that have come out of this and from all of your input over the coming weeks. So thanks again to everyone for joining.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.